Good afternoon, and thank you guys for staying. I think for me, first of all, it's a privilege to be invited and really come and speak about Comric. I think the name Comric has been mentioned quite a number of times, and I think I wanted to use this opportunity to really try and give awareness and provide some context about Comric. And I think my presentation today, even it lends itself even better because there's been quite a lot of talk about the need to collaborate as the network providers. And actually, you'll be surprised that there is already some collaboration that is happening, and it is happening under the umbrella of Comric. So, let's see. I think, just as a context, whilst we all understand the role that is played by the telecoms network, that it is not just an essential infrastructure, it is very critical for the ecosystem of the economy. I think, to give an example, I think we know the role that the telecoms industry are going to be playing in the next coming elections to make sure that there's continuous connectivity across the voting stations, the counting side and the result sides. And no one ever talks about that there is someone who does that work, and it's really the telecom sector that does that. And also, we have to always make sure there's listed here, which is Vodacom, MTNSA, Telkom, Cell C, and Liquid Intelligent Technologies. So these are the founders of Comric. I think Comric has been in existence for 3 years now. And the real purpose Comric was formed, it's about collective and collaboration to combat telecommunication crime and also the various risks that are impacting on the telecommunication industry. What the telcos realized about 2-3 years ago is that being a single voice does not always help when we try to echo the challenges as a sector that we are suffering in terms of the crime that is committed in our infrastructure, but also where our infrastructure is also used as a conduit to commit the various crimes. And this is why the 5 entities which are the founders have actually decided that it is critical that as a telco sector, we need to come together. So like I said earlier, everyone was talking about collaboration. It is already happening to a scale in looking at the issues that deal with crime and security for the telecom industry. Can I have there it is. In terms of some of our focus areas, which I will cover more in details, is the issues of cyber crime or cyber security or cyber attacks. We look at the issues of the industry-wide collar crime, the issues of the store robberies, and the issues of the physical infrastructure attacks that is happening on our network. Okay. So, what do we do when we look at the issues of cyber attacks? So like I mentioned that the 5 key stakeholders are the founders of Comric. What happens in order to address the various issues of cybersecurity and cybercrime, each of the network operators, they have, I call them the specialist team, that are sort of seconded to Comric to form a work stream that looks at cybersecurity for the industry. And why it becomes so critical, because I heard some of the speakers in terms of the importance of sharing of certain intelligence data in terms of addressing the various issues, be it product issues, be it crime issues. And this is what is happening under the cybersecurity workstream. I think if you read the latest Interpol Cyber Africa Assessment Report, I think there's a continuous rise of cybercrime that is really impacting the business. And remember, as the telecom service providers, what do we provide? We provide the pipe. And if at any point in time that pipe is compromised, it has an impact in terms of information security. And be it information security in terms of POPIA or the PCI DSS, these are some of the legislations or standards that get impacted if there's a security compromise in terms of through the cyber attacks that we've seen happening. I think some of the cyber attacks that we've seen, because what the team also do, it sits around and scan globally in terms of the various cyber crimes that are taking place. And we are able to monitor also which of our network operators are compromised so that we can be able to share that information with them, so that we can be able to, as the industry, be aware of some of the threats that are happening. And that's what happens, and that's the role that the workstream is playing in terms of looking at the various threats and how, as the industry, we can prevent, where possible, some of these attacks that are coming into our networks. I think on white-collar crime, we have the similar issues. There's a work stream that focuses on white-collar crime in the sector, like I mentioned. There's crime that is committed against us as a sector, but there's crime as well where the sector is used as a conduit to commit various crime. We look at issues of subscription fraud, issues of identity theft. I think some of you have heard about the issues of SIM swap. I think there's always a debate between myself and my colleagues in the banking industry. I always call it a banking fraud, not a SIM swap fraud. And it's because our infrastructure through the SIM swap is really used as a conduit to commit the various crime. But the criminal needs to have other access in terms of being able to get access into your banking details and some of the information. And that's why the power of collaboration becomes even more critical, that if one, as a sector, we are together, we are able to communicate with the other sector players. So one of our strategic partners, it is SEBRIC, and SEBRIC looks after the banking sector interest, and we are able to collaborate with them in terms of fighting some of these white-collar crime that are infecting both the industries. Let's see how this works. I don't know whether it's a battery. Okay. The other issue that happens when we talk about physical infrastructure attacks that happens in the telco, and I think that is one of the reasons why the telcos decided to form COMBRIC, so that we can speak in one voice, because if you try and speak to either the legislators or the law enforcement as one entity, your voice is not as louder than when you speak as a collective. If I can give you an example, okay, I didn't press anything. I don't know if someone is, yeah. So if I just give you as an example, what we don't know, between December and end of April, I think in our network infrastructure, we've suffered just over 10,000 incidences of theft and damage that has happened across the industry. And for the repair and the restoration cost, just for that period, we've already spent about 250 million. This is just a 5 months period. But this does not take into consideration the loss of revenue, for instance, the impact on the service that happens during the time when these incidences that are committed. And what type of these incidences? Commonly what we see in the towers, there are batteries that are used as part of the powering the towers. I think the load shedding has probably been more impactful to us than anything else, because these batteries have been stolen for people to use as a power during the time of load shedding, but not understanding the impact it has on the network infrastructure. when we try and put generators as a backup in a case of load shedding, they steal those generators. And then they also steal the diesel. So that is why you find the interruption that usually happens when there's load shedding in terms of network. It's not that there is no backup. Wherever the backup is, sometimes it also gets stolen. And that's one of the reasons that as the industry, we realize there's an importance of us coming together in terms of fighting these type of crimes so that we can collaborate and really deal with it. Can I have the next slide, please? Because I think here I'll just give you one of the case studies in terms of the value that has happened with the collaboration of the entities. A simple one. At some point, the network operators, the mobile operators used to suffer a lot in terms of store robberies, where criminals target the devices. And that thing was a problem that we didn't really understand, that they will hit MTN, tomorrow they had Telkom, they had Vodacom, they had Cell C. Individually, the entities could not fight this crime. But what we started to do is that probably it might be better if collectively we sit around and look in terms of, could be the videos that we see in terms of the recordings, where we can do some facial recognition. And then we saw that some of these individuals are the same people that would have hit Vodacom, would have hit Telkom, would have hit Cell C. But had we not been speaking together in the industry, we would not have known that. And what we did, we were able to call in crime intelligence so that we can work together with the data that we had. And also what we did to supplement the data of those facial recognition, we do own the call logs as the network operators. It's the data that we should be able to use for crime prevention. And that's what we did with the help of crime prevention and unit, so that we can be able to say at a certain point in time, let's look at certain common numbers in a certain area or in a certain store or certain shopping complex. And you go to another shopping complex and look at the data of the certain numbers that would have been around the time of the robbery. Then you start seeing a pattern of similar numbers that appear in these different robberies at a certain point in time. And then you start zooming it in, where you can then be able to say, like I say, we have the data as the telcos. Why can't we use it to fight the crime? And then based on the data, because these are suspects, and bearing in mind, because we already had opened a criminal case, we can, through crime intelligence, to say, we need to understand who are the people that own these numbers. And after we were able to do that, we were able to point to the syndicate that was busy targeting the network operators. I think if we look in the last 2 years, Strawberries has really gone down when it comes to the operators. And this is the power of collaboration. And we realized, I think one of the speakers said that we have the data. We need to find a smart way, how do we use the data as the industry? And one of it is to really minimize the damage that crime is doing in our country, but also what crime is doing on our networks as well. Next slide, please. So the importance of collaboration and sharing information. One of the things that we are able to do across the work streams that I've already spoken about, we are able to share the threat intelligence data, but we are able to also look at the best practice in terms of what is happening in one of the operators that is doing well, but also what is happening globally as well, so that we can strengthen our controls in terms of making sure that as the network operators, we are able to exchange the necessary data that it is. Probably someone is asking, how are we able to exchange the data? In terms of the Competition Act, because the focus of COMRIC is about crime, we are enabled and we are allowed to exchange data only for the purposes of crime prevention. So it's always key to understand that all these operators are competitors in their right, but when it comes to issues of crime prevention, we are able to speak one language. And also from the Competition Act, we are allowed to exchange any data that can assist in terms of crime prevention. And COMRIG's role is that it sanitizes and making sure that all the operators, they remain compliant and that we're not seeing maybe flouting any of the legislative framework that exists. I think one of the things that we are busy looking at the moment is to look at why the sector doesn't establish its own CSAT, because that becomes critical. And I think as a sector, we need to start looking at those opportunities. I think for the longest time, we've been operating in silos because they are competitors. But under the umbrella of COMRIG, we're trying to bridge some of that gap in making sure that we fight what is common and we see opportunities and collaborate in terms of providing the service that is required. I think 2022 to 2023, I think the industry contributed, invested about 76 billion as a backup for load shedding issues. The investment, and I think some of the speakers spoke about earlier, that the investment the sector does to always make sure that there's a reliability of the network is very huge and is most of the time never recognized. I think through one of our sister association, ACT, we've also been trying to lobby government to look at the issues of diesel rebates, because if we look at what we spend on diesel, just to keep the reliability of the network is quite huge, and is one of those things that have become critical that we need to make sure that we do. We're also looking in terms of what do we do as the sector in terms of responding in cases of security breach. We do work with the law enforcement agencies in trying to deal with the issues. Can I have a next slide, please? Thank you. And another one, next one. Yeah. So one of the things that we do as a sector, which we've started to look into now, is how do we optimize the resources? Each of the operators spend money in providing security, and some of the security of the sites are co-shared sites by the network operators. So this is one of the things that we're looking at in terms of how do we optimize some of the resources, be it human, be it also the cost of security. Because it becomes very critical at the end of the day that if we have co-shared locations or sites, as the industry, we need to find smarter ways in terms of protecting those sites and making sure that at the end of the day, we all benefit as the industry. Next slide. So, like I mentioned, I think some of the strategic partners, the Associations of Comms and Technology, the acronym is ACT. What they do is the same members that we have at COMRIG, but their mandate is different. They look at legislation and policy framework, whereas we look at the crime and the risk aspect in the telecommunications sector. But we are hip joined in terms of looking at after the industry. And both of these associations were formed about 2 years ago, which is the first for South Africa to have such of the associations. We also work with Digital Council Africa amongst the few, because what we've also realized, what the industry has done over time, they've outsourced the infrastructure to tower companies. And some of the tower companies, they belong under the Digital Council Africa. So it becomes very critical for us that we continue to collaborate and partner with some of the strategic players in their various industries. Also, what we try to do, we need to start understanding the entire risk landscape in the telcos. Whilst crime is critical, but we also need to understand what are these emerging risks that as a telco we can collaborate and come up with innovative solutions to make sure that we still provide the necessary customer service. COMRIG is housed in such a way that we need to look at these various risks that are affecting the telco. So like I mentioned that everyone was talking about the need for collaboration. It is happening to a scale that at the moment we're focusing on crime and risk, but there's also the opportunity that we can look at this from the issues of providing the service to the customer. I think what is critical for us is that we need to have an understanding and appreciation that we do operate under a legislative framework. Some of the other projects that we're busy looking at the moment is the issue of handset blacklisting, for instance. I think we really understand that there's been a lot of people that have been victims of device theft, but also more critical is that some of these devices, we know that they get used and reused, either within our borders or outside our borders. We are trying to strengthen the issue of the handset blacklisting so that we can minimize this theft crime, because people are becoming victims because the device can always be used. And there are some of these are called the black market shops that are open to open these devices even after it has been blacklisted. So it's one of the projects that Comric is looking at. And there's also the hot potato of RICA as well. I think for the industry, it is a hot potato because we understand the implication of RICA, what it is from a revenue point of view, but also we need to understand the role as the telco we need to play in making sure that we play our role in terms of crime prevention. I think the issue of RICA, there's always a misconception that there's unregistered SIM card, which is not true. I think from the industry, we know that all the SIM cards are registered, but all what we have is what we call the pre-recard SIM cards, which you can go to any taxi rank and buy. They are registered, it's just that they are pre-recard. And they might be recard in a bulk, they might not be recard in your name. And this is some of the SIM cards that we know criminals have found a way to use them to commit the various crimes. And Comric is focusing on that project in terms of how do we play our role as the sector in crime prevention and looking at some of these issues like RICA and handset blacklisting. So there is strategic projects that we are busy with, and we are working with the CASA and the Department of Justice in some of these projects as well. I think in conclusion, I think I cannot echo more the issue of collaboration because it is very important. But I think what we found as Comric, which is a challenge, and I think as we collaborate, you'll always find this as a challenge. At the back of our mind, the members know that they are in competition, and you always have a challenge in terms of what data can be shared, what type of data can be shared, and where it is shared and where it is stored, because that thing becomes even more critical. I think just to allay the fears, the data that Comric has is not shared across the various network operators. It is shared into a Comric platform that is owned by Comric, and so that we can also manage and mitigate the risk of anti-competitive behavior. So there is a need that we need to collaborate as the industry. It is already happening, and I think we have seen the benefit of it. What we will need is that we need to really encourage that it happens even more, even from the product and the service offering point of view. But I think this is lessons learned that you'll always have resistance as well. There was good intention, but there's always going to be resistance with the people that needs to be part of that value chain of information sharing. Because information, as they always say, is key and is also power. But we also have to manage the information responsibly because of issues of POPIA and some of the legislations that I've mentioned. So this is what Comric stands for, so that in future, when one wants to understand who's looking at the crime in the sector or what are the new trends, you are able to communicate to Comric, and we can reach out to our members so that we can understand the scale of whatever the crime that has been identified and see how it affects them. And thank you for the opportunity, and hope you have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Thokozani Mvelase. It was an absolute pleasure having you.